So we're not in any big hurry, so I'm just gonna, because we had one cancellation, Stephen Hughes. So I'm just gonna give a few minutes to see if people are coming in late from lunch and to see if anybody joins online. Speaking, this is the room mic. Stay. But if, and right now there isn't anybody online, so.
So it's easier for them to hear if I
But
stand
so,
here.
yeah, I'm just saying if you're standing here, because
Yeah.
this is the microphone that's
Yeah.
going off onto line, but there's nobody there anyway, so. But that's the main one. So I
Okay.
don't know if you want the remote, or you can also just do up and down on the.
Okay, yeah, I think
This is the,
let me try it.
okay,
Yeah, I think the remote is
Okay,
easier because I'm
yeah.
holding.
I always like the
Yeah.
remote.
Yeah.
Erica, are you hearing us? Unmute if you are.
Hi there. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome to session 2 of Psychoanalytic Associations. I'm Mike Fortune from UC Irvine. Delighted to be back. Delighted to have these panels going. This one, we were jam-packed and overflowing in time for the first one. This one is a little more less cramped. Stephen Hughes is unable to join us. He's chairing a session at this exact same time. So, but our first talk for this part 2 is Yichen Rao from Utrecht, MIT/Utrecht. Financial Technologies in the Mirror Stage, a Lacanian Analysis of Chinese Digital Investment. For the record, the first person to respond.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yes, because I'm really longing to see, there's a kind of academic dynamics about using psychoanalysis in STS. So my encounter with psychoanalysis, I'm an anthropologist by training, by the way, but I'm also trained as a psychotherapist in psychoanalysis about 8 years ago. But I became a psychotherapist also because I did my master's research as an anthropologist in the treatment camp of internet addiction that Chinese parents send their children to receive 6 months intensive military training as well as psychotherapy, because they think their children should be spend more time in schools, studying for their competitive college entrance exams instead of playing esports games. So at that time, I followed a psychotherapist there, and then I become an assistant of that psychotherapist, and that she is actually a psychoanalytic trained therapist, and that gets me to become super interested in psychoanalysis. And so later I became a psychotherapist myself, just trying to help out families and especially young people when they're, having needs. But then later, this has also become a very interesting dynamics I'm trying to observe. I become a PhD in anthropology. So basically in my research, I focus on this collective unconscious dynamics of a social process. So I'm looking at how a market could emerge through unconscious processes, and how technologies, especially like financial technologies, are making people, like enchanting people to believe in something that they shouldn't be believing in the first place, like a Ponzi scheme. So today's topic is really just applying part of Lacan's critical theory about mirror stage to understand, the dynamics that are that Chinese digital investors are experiencing. We're just gonna start. By the way, the slash means that I'm currently a postdoc at MIT's Comparative Media Studies program, but then will soon join Utrecht University as a faculty member. So on a gloomy Monday morning, August 2018, in her apartment in suburban Beijing, Meng, in English means dream, a 33-year-old woman woke up at 5:40 a.m. and anxiously tried to brush her teeth, wash her face, and then apply some quick makeup without waking up the family before she could rush to her neighborhood to catch the company bus that picked her up at 6:15 a.m. So as a data analyst for a large IT company, Meng has to travel from the western suburbs of Beijing to the eastern side, where the company is based, every weekday morning. So due to the heavy morning traffic, she must take the company bus to complete her remote clock punch, so that even if the bus, which can take 2 to 3 hours for a one-way trip, does not arrive at the company before 9 a.m., she will not be penalized for a late check-in, what is very likely to happen if she takes public transportation or drives herself. Although her salary is higher than many of her non-IT peers, Meng was very unhappy with her job because of the long commutes. She could not really move closer to the company because she bought the apartment she could afford 2 years ago when she was not working at the company. And she won't be able to change her home conveniently because she needed home to enroll her children in a good school a few years later. And it is also financially and socially feasible for her to rent an apartment closer. It's not feasible for her to rent an apartment closer. As a woman of 33, she needs to prove her value to the company by being promoted to a senior level. Otherwise, she may be laid off in a few years as the company looks to cut costs by hiring cheaper and younger employees for junior positions. So amidst her stressful daily routine, the happiest and calmest moment she had was when she got on a company bus and then found the time to browse her smartphone. She would check her ever-growing quote-unquote savings, as numbers shown in green, in her financial investment app called Daily Wealth. She was happy that while she was busy working or sleeping, the application had helped her earn another 200 yuan as a daily interest based on her total investment of 500,000 yuan, her family's savings. This signaled to her a secure source of income that she felt in control of beyond her current job as a data analyst, which she found stressful and uncontrollable. She dreams that in a few years she could invest more and more of her savings into the applications, so she could retire early to get rid of the boring competitions. However, her dream turned into a nightmare a month later. In another morning, while she was on the same bus, she found out that all of a sudden, she could not log into her account. She tried to ask her consultant, which was also her former colleague who introduced her to the platform, whether there was some technical issues, which happened before. but no reply was heard until she found out in the news that the platform was closed down by the police yesterday, as it was charged for operating as a Ponzi scheme which created fake assets to attract people's savings and manage them without a financial license. The charge is a common one directed against thousands of similar digital financial investment platforms that have collapsed in China during the past decade. Most of these platforms registered as IT companies claim themselves to be a peer-to-peer lending platform that provides innovative financial solutions that match the financial needs of individual lenders and individual borrowers. To survive in a competitive market, their innovation was to actually conduct banking business without a financial license. Most of them packaged the borrowing requests from the so-called individual borrowers into quote-unquote wealth management products and sell those products to middle-class investors like Meng, who facing the investment app could easily make investment choices by selecting from different products. And then they could earn a 20 to 30% annual interest rate from such investment, which is a lot as compared to the 3 to 5% interest as promised by banks that sell similar products. From 2012 to 2021, the market has witnessed the rise and fall of thousands of P2P platforms, which ruined the life savings of millions of Chinese middle-class families. Meng's story is just one of the millions. So in my current book project, I seek to understand why would people like Meng believe in these Ponzi schemes that are too good to be true, and why would people desire such investment opportunities, and the role of digital technologies in instituting such beliefs. And I do that from a semiotic, anthropological, and psychoanalytic perspective. So in other papers, I would have discussed in details the political economic conditions that give rise to Chinese people's naturalization of financial desire in a rapidly developing economy. But today, I'm putting this on hold in this presentation because I want to use the stories to particularly communicate with Lacanian theories to build a deeper understanding of the subject's micro-level interactions with those technologies, which is how people's financial desire is being ritualized in their everyday mundane encounter with those digital applications. So in Lacanian framework, desire is neither a derivative of individual personhood nor a cultural product. It is a dialectical process that is both the producer and also the product of social structures and realities. It results from what is called a structural lack or object patia, separated from the subject to defend ourselves against the loss of our primordial jouissance. And it is closely linked to the understanding of narcissism, self-image, and the ego. Freud defines narcissism as an investment of the libido in the ego, but Freud does not clarify how this investment comes about, and thus leaves open the question concerning the mysterious emergence of the ego. Lacan offers an explanation by claiming that a primitive version of a unified self-experience happens when the infant recognizes itself for the first time in the mirror between 6 and 18 months. The ego is described as the reflection of a narcissistic structure grounded on the return of the infant's image to itself in the moment of pseudo-totalization, when the infant looks into the mirror. So in this intermediate stage between the autoerotism and object love, the ego emerges as the result of the partial drive's investment in something that gives the subject for the first time a unified sense of self, the self-image. The mirror stage happens like a metonymic structure, where a fragmented subject or an immature body identifies with a mirrored and totalizing image, which resulted in a self-identification of an object world, quote unquote, grounded in the moment when the child image was alienated from self as an imaginary object and sent back to it a message of its own subjecthood. And this is by Rose 2003. So this is also the moment when the other will form imaginary relations with the subject so that the subject can circumscribe a void identified with the other's demand, within which the object of desire is concealed. So let me put it in plain language. The subject desires what the parents or the society, or generally what the Lacanian others demand or desire. as they imagine their virtual images were to be actualized if the big others' desires were fulfilled through them. So how mirrors exist today? I'll put it in a more recent and vivid example if you're not familiar with Lacan. So as a new father of 1 year old, I learned the lazy technique of parenting that many parents are forced to learn, which is to provide my crying daughter with a smartphone. Though we all understand that an early exposure to smartphone or digital videos may cause harms to whatever, nerves or eyes, it is an unavoidable reality that as adults are with those digital devices, most of the time, the children would learn to design something mediated through the digital devices, which could always reflect their own images and the parents' desires. As early as when she began to crawl on the playmat, she would recognize the value of the smartphone and the charms of her image as reflected by my camera and began to smile and laugh whenever she saw it. Then as she got more and more accustomed to having a smartphone in front of her, taking photos and videos of her daily activities, she began more and more obsessed in viewing specific photos and videos in our smartphone, which is her own moving images. Paying attention here. So if the pictures I'm showing her is not about her, but in more kind of static picture, not a moving picture, she would want to swipe them away. She wants to particularly see her own bodies moving as reflected through that mirror. If we're using the Lacanian perspective to understand this, a moving image of the infant's own body objectively represents her as a more complete and capable subject, which fits her parents' desire. That is why the parents would take those pictures in the first place. So the experience of viewing her more complete moving self-images helps her manage her anxiety about incompleteness and obtain a sense of control and the mastery of her body, and begin to form a more perfect self-image. According to Lacan, imagination is a medium through which even we ourselves always exist in a virtual double. Through the imaginary register, people began furnishing the self with a virtual unity. All identifications with quote-unquote images establish a sense of unity, mastery, and autonomy that is not there, quote-unquote, in the real, in the Lacanian sense. Smartphone with their built-in audiovisual technologies strengthens the imaginary register in a fundamental way because it materializes the images and makes the unreal feel infinitely close to the real. And this sense of realness can be easily manipulated through the app designs. This is why there's a whole department working on how to improve the user interface or user experience of the applications. Their job is simply to make you have a smoother interaction with the application, which serves a better imaginary of who you are and what you can do with the technology. Usually people would associate this with social media applications such as Instagram or LinkedIn, which helps you, create a unified, clean, and fancy self-image in comparison with many others. But very few people would associate with financial technologies, such as payment apps, investment apps that we use on a daily basis, because those seem to be more about the management of numbers instead of images. However, what the fintech users ended up interacting are not just real numbers, but numbers displayed as images. In a sense, the numbers are not simply registered in a way that the believers of the quantified self is doing with their Fitbit or other self-tracking technologies. That's not the case. So those numbers on your financial apps are symbols of your achievements and losses. It is essentially a metonymic representation of your financial identity, or whether you are a winner or a loser in the world of finance, where other people around you have passive income from their different financial assets. So you are experiencing what the other hopes you can experience as well, a powerful source of financial wealth that is beyond your depreciating daily wages and bank savings. In the beginning case of Meng, who get closer to the market through interactions with the app displayed on the mobile phone screen, Lacan's understanding of the quote-unquote mirror stage is of particular help in understanding how a fintech subjectivity is being formed through the optical unconscious and formation of images in the imaginary register. So one interesting design of almost all financial applications today is the visualization of the number of savings or profits, making you obtain a real-time knowledge of how much you have earned. This is a powerful design because however simple it is, it cultivates a sense of more complete financial subject, a smart investor who can now see through one's finance clearly and efficiently, by sending you back an image of how your money has been moved, as if they are part of your body with your digital actions. As Moon reflected on what she enjoyed seeing on a daily basis, the most exciting part is the message that conveys the stability of a steady financial gain, which signifies to her a hopeful possibility that she can survive without having to work, especially work on something that feels alienating to her. She felt comfortable every morning when viewing those numbers in green, adding up to her total fund, which has become greater and greater every day. She became more careful with spending because those money could potentially be saved to incur more money in those financial apps. Those money can be saved in return for her happier future without necessity to work in a factory-like IT company that leaves her no time to enjoy her life and her family. In a sense, the investors became infants in front of their smartphone, as their bodies are so immature and incapable in front of a complicated financial world, as mediated through those apps, if without the mediation of such financial machines to help unify people's incomplete financial body. Smart investors thus become the identities and subjectivities conveyed through the mirrored image of ever-growing numbers generated by algorithms, which never reflected the real of how such schemes are actually managed behind the screen. Digital investment is thus not only an investment of money in a digital platform, it is about an investment of libido and the ego from a partial body to a more complete and unified imaginary of financial body sustained by visual design. Thank you. Yes, so I think a great comparison, like optical comparison, is that how you manage your finance back in the times without any smartphone. So it's like, you know, you're just reading your account book or whatever that is more static, and you don't see, for example, you don't see your daily income as growing in a chart like ever flowing chart lines and stuff like that. So this is just one example that when those investment apps, they promise a steadily growing income as displayed in images or numbers. If you are a cryptocurrency investor or a stock investor, and that kind of mobility, as you can see in your chat, is just very real time and a very, very dramatic in a sense that makes you, so some of the people who are interviewed about their experience with those cryptocurrency investments, that is like a roller coaster. It's really like seeing those prices coming up and forth like in a short time. It's really like feeling very nausea in a sense that your body is reacting. In that sense, it kind of becomes an organ that helps you experience certain movement of your money in a sense that is so intimately connected to you as you hold a smartphone and then maybe sit wherever you're comfortable, like in the toilet or something. So it actually makes it kind of a kind of experience a different unity of kind of this body and these images. And this also challenges and changes your previous understanding and imaginaries of money in a time when you don't have those kind of visual technologies. So this is how I try to use this mirror stage as how an infant was seeing when he or she cannot move very well, and she sees kind of a moving image of her, or something like that, and imagine how she could become a better person or something. Yeah. 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 Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's very, yeah, I think the design is very intentional. Like, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think that, yeah, it's very interesting as you say that, because, after those platforms collapse, when the police take over those platforms, the first thing they do is to make the platform less desirable by making those buttons gray, and then showing people this is no longer useful. This app is no longer useful. And then they put those kind of police color, Chinese police color that is very deep blue with white words on it, showing, telling people, announcing they have closed down this platform, and then it's just make people unable to establish a connection with those desires anymore. And then my own experience, for example, is like TikTok. So if you play TikTok without playing the sound, you will be less addictive. In a sense, you don't just swipe that much. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe the entire general.
Okay. Yeah. I think I think in a way that uh uh in Lacan's term, of course, everything that we interact with images is a fake. In a sense, it's not real. And then I believe the Ponzi scheme is just a way to sustain a kind of imaginary, and as long as they can. It's like they're using certain techniques to sustain that imaginary, and then another police coming, or until they figure out it's not sustainable. So I think it's just one of the many interesting ways, because many of those platforms, when they establish they do not aim to be a Ponzi scheme. They really wants to become a bank, in a sense. They want to become the next Capital One of China. So it's really, many of the platforms are very ambitious in the beginning, but then they realize that there are just many competitors in this economy, and then some people are just Ponzi schemes, and then that kind of ruin the whole ecosystem. So they have to become a Ponzi scheme because there are no, incessant flows of money coming in. So it's really how the whole, maybe you can argue about how digital capital is made through this kind of unsustainable imaginary, in a way. So I think that's I think one of the very interesting response. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for those who joined late, Stephen Hughes is unable to join us. He's chairing a session at this exact same time. So Eric, that puts you up. Do you want the capacity to share your screen, or? You're muted if you're.
Yeah, sorry there. Yeah, I would like to be able to, I've got a little slideshow here.
Okay, hold on. Let me see. Do you see the share screen button, or?
I do, yep.
Oh, okay, then go right ahead.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So I wish I could join you all there in person. That had been the plan. I'm really sorry to be doing this remotely. This presentation is entitled Fort Data, STS, and the Archive of Attachment Research. Oh, you can't see me yet. My goodness. There we go. Can you see my face too, or is that not a part of things here?
We can see your face, and
Okay, good. Okay.
although I don't know if you can see ours.
So, oh yeah, they're great. Hey, hi, everybody. Lovely. So as a disclaimer, but completely at the fault of our esteemed organizer, Michael Fortune, this presentation makes a lot of speculations, associations, and links, but perhaps no proper arguments. I'm a psychodynamic psychotherapist in private practice and a father of 6, so it's certainly safe to say that my interest in attachment is overdetermined. As a clinician, I came to my doctoral research in performance studies at UC Davis with a particular interest in the performativity of attachment, the way that the aesthetic contours of early life unfold into the more or less pleasurable problems and projects of adulthood. I hate to have to say this, but I also suspect that it will come as no surprise to this kind of audience. The planetary attachment milieu is changing, transforming us from postmodern subjects into post-human subscribers. What I mean by this is that our attachment behavioral systems are being hacked and reconfigured in relation to a computational attachment figure, by which we are all surveilled and to which we are all subscribed. There is a reason that the child suckling at the mother's breast is the prototype of all future love relations, writes Freud in his 3 essays on sexuality. There's a reason they call it your feed. But I've gotten ahead of myself to start off this way, and I want to return to what brought me here. My hook is to say that social theory has attachment issues. The widely read work of important scholars like Judith Butler and Lauren Berlant has installed attachment as a critical affective form and theoretical concept for social theory. Butler places passionate attachment at the heart of subject formation, and Berlant asks, what if we derived our social theory from the scenes of ambivalence, which is to say, the scenes of attachment that are intimate, defined by desire, and overwhelming? Despite these invitations, there has remained rather little engagement with the actual empirical archive of attachment research. We cannot fault Butler or Berlant for this, for neither claims to do anything like science or technology studies. But I share Liz Wilson's conviction that biological data can be enormously helpful for feminist theory. And by helpful, Wilson means arresting, transforming, taxing. So we might also be animated by Berlant's inconvenience drive, where the slippage between obstacle and object is precisely what's at stake. This paucity of contact with the empirical archive of attachment research has allowed for a tendency to conflate attachment and psychoanalysis, inadvertently obscuring attachment theory's historical origins as a kind of materialist critique of psychoanalytic object relations. A rematerialization of Klein's dematerialized mother. John Bowlby's training began, after all, under Klein's psychoanalytic supervision. And Mary Ainsworth's foundational strange situation procedure, one might argue, turns object relations inside out. Attachment can be justifiably framed as a biological imperative, but the research doesn't have to be reduced to empirical desire or a universalizing Eurotaxonomy of human relations. Attachment research is undoubtedly complicit in what Kyla Schuler would call sentimental biopower. It is also easily confused with attachment parenting, not to mention tangled up in the retrofuturity of neoliberal family life, conservative politics, and even lesbian jokes. In any case, this presentation takes Butler and Berlant seriously in their invitation to look toward scenes of attachment, drawing on my own fieldwork and training in Mary Ainsworth's strange situation protocol, and offering this foundational empirical procedure as a technoprimal scene for social theory. In this regard, I simply mean to make the archive an affordance for thinking about the politics of technology, performativity, and aesthetic formation in attachment. An underlying claim here is that subjectivity, or whatever it means to feel like a self, emerges as an effect of bodied life under the imperative of the attachment apparatus. In other words, the subject is not only affected by attachment, but an effect of it. I'm interested in the performativity of attachment, not only in regard to the lab as theater or the performativity of scientific knowledge production, but also as it pertains to the technical production of historical subjects and subjectivities. This presentation relocates the strain situation procedure as an individuation device, alongside 3 other pre-Oedipal tools from the Psychoanalytic Hall of Fame: Freud's spool, Lacan's mirror, and Winnicott's blanket. These pre-Oedipal technologies are employed between the ages of 6 to 18 months as infants enter into language and locomotion and begin to separate out from the earliest caregivers. But let me return again to attachment theory before we get back to these other pre-Oedipal scenes. Historically speaking, attachment theory emerges under the particular material intersection of cybernetics, ethology, child psychiatry, and war. John Bowlby was indeed under the psychoanalytic supervision of Melanie Klein and was a contemporary of Anna Freud and Dorothy Burlingham. In 1939, for example, he and D.W. Winnicott penned a letter to the British Medical Journal entitled "On the Evacuation of Small Children." For our purposes, Bowlby's interest can be illustrated by the following statement. He writes, "The great shortcoming, in my judgment, of the psychoanalytic approach to children has always been that it has been willfully uninterested and inept in regard to the environmental situation of the child. The child is thought of almost as a closed system, and treatment is directed at this psychological system within the child." We can note here the influence of cybernetic systems theory in Bowlby's reflection and critique, but I also want to make a further distinction. While Kleinian object relations seems to focus on the mediation process as more or less internal to the subject, Bowlby's critique is a way of reorienting attention to external mediation via material care and in the environmental milieu. Bowlby's ideas about attachment soon began to become rendered as replicable data in the work of his student-turned-colleague, Mary Ainsworth. Mary Ainsworth's strange situation procedure, which she developed in the early 70s, is the foundational empirical device of developmental attachment theory. It is among the most productive and enduring experimental protocols in the history of research psychology. The laboratory-based procedure unfolds in a single room furnished simply with 2 chairs and a pile of toys on the ground. The 8 episodes of the procedure are observed through a 2-way mirror and always recorded. In the procedure, a 12 to 18-month-old infant and their mother or other enter the room. The mother settles the infant on the floor, oriented toward the camera, then takes the chair furthest from the door. At about 3 minutes, a stranger enters the room and sits down in the remaining chair. After another couple minutes have passed, the stranger gets down on the floor and begins to engage the infant with the toys. Over the course of the remaining episodes, the infant undergoes a series of 2 brief separations and reunions with the mother. The protocol is used to study infant attachment behavior, patterns in the strategies infants use to elicit care and affect regulation through proximity to their mothers. The strain situation continues to be replicated hundreds of times a year around the world and suggests 3 primary infant attachment patterns. Finds produces insecure avoidant at 20 to 30%, secure at 50 to 60%, and insecure resistant at 10 to 20%. The avoidant ones are standoffish when the mother comes back. They don't show a whole lot of interest. The secure ones usually have some form of contact and they get well regulated and they go back to exploring the room. And the insecure resistant could also is sometimes called preoccupied or anxious. And those ones sort of can't let go of the mother when she returns. They can't really get affectively regulated and then go back to exploring the cultural field. Unfortunately, I do not have the time to discuss the findings much further, nor to discuss the disorganized, disoriented D modifier as a kind of auxiliary category. If you are curious about your own adult attachment style, however, even NPR has a quiz. They note, quote, "Research has shown that just knowing about the various attachment styles can positively influence your relationships." My interest, however, is not only in what the research seems to have to say about early relational life, but in the aesthetic attachment between the researchers and their empirical device. There are easier ways to measure attachment, but the procedure continues to be run hundreds of times a year. Each iteration is carefully coded for 4 to 6 hours by highly trained researchers. Experimental replication as a kind of compulsive repetition. We will return to the strain situation again briefly at the end, but I want to turn back now to the three pre-Oedipal technologies from the Psychoanalytic Hall of Fame: Freud's spool, Lacan's mirror, and Winnicott's blanket. Freud's Fort Da. A boy, about 18 months, has come into possession of a wooden spool still fastened to a few feet of string. He gleefully casts it from his crib, cheering "Fort," gone, only to pull it back in again with an equally joyful "Da," or "there." Fort, da, Fort, da. The boy is Freud's grandson. The game is a dramatization of the mother's comings and goings, a cultural achievement, Freud writes, in which the emotional contours of involuntary separation and reunion are actively remediated in play. Ta-da, Fort Da, or I sometimes think Fort Data, because it's replicable and reliability comes to count as data, as evidence of something. Lacan's mirror stage. A full-length mirror, Lacan's, of course, assembles all your messy senses into a clean and singular image. It's you, sort of, because it also makes you into an object, displacing your senses into an imago, a kind of external first avatar. Oh, and your mother is there too, behind you in the mirror, triangulating what you feel and what you see and what you see feeling you. Winnicott's transitional object. That particular blanket, stuffed doll or bear to which many young ones become especially attached around 12 to 18 months. The first not me possession, he calls it. And it also marks our primal dispossession, remediating absence. That is to say, remediating the presence of the mother in absentia. Something we can hold on to as a kind of portable security and which holds us together when we're coming undone. Not exactly a substitution for the mother's body, but a medium or interface for learning to feel okay without it. Now, in psychoanalysis, object usually means human other, but the three scenes gathered here together are examples of how early encounters with non-human objects produce the feeling of being a subject. Objects are technological participants in our subject formation. And part of what makes objects so interesting is that they are also obstacles, objecting to our subjection. They facilitate our individuation not only as subjects, but also as other objects, reminding us, in a sense and in our senses, of our objectness. It's not the hammer's fault when you hit your finger. It's the way a hammer works. Now, I'm beginning to feel that it is about time to wrap this up. So what I want to suggest is that the strange situation procedure is not only a scene of infant attachment, but also a scene of attachment for the researchers themselves, a kind of Fort Da for the return of the repressed. As Derrida has noted, cinema plus psychoanalysis equals a science of ghosts. This procedure is a technical aesthetic interface through which the researchers modulate the return of the repressed on their own terms, forever revisiting, reproducing, and remediating forms of attachment. I'm a bit afraid here that I've tried to cram too much in, so I will return to summarize the claim with which I started. Attachment is taken to be an ontogenetic and phylogenetic performative force at work in all dimensions of mammalian life. This includes even proto-human capacities for grasping, clinging, following, and the co-regulation of affect. But the performativity of attachment must be also understood to include our subject formation and ongoing reformation in psychotechnical object worlds. My argument here is that our subjection is migrating to a subscription-based model. In other words, the planetary attachment milieu is changing, reformatting us from postmodern subjects into posthuman subscribers. Our attachment behavioral systems are being reconfigured in relation to a computational attachment figure, by which we are all surveilled and to which we are all subscribed. The archive of attachment research is populated by precisely those scenes of ambivalence from which we ought to derive our social theory, a possible place to look amidst our transformation from subjects into subscribers. There's a reason that the infant suckling at the mother's breast is the prototype of all future love relations. There's a reason they call it your feed. And that's it. I can't really hear anything, but I see some clapping, which I appreciate. I can't hear anything if there's anything happening out there.
There was momentary silence, but I'll come in. So
Amazing.
have you ever, that was super, Eric. Thank you very much. Have you, I'm curious because your first image seemed to be some snapshots from the archive of the Bowlby Ainsworth research. Have you really kind of gone into those and tried to read them otherwise in a non-attached way?
Well, I mean, I think my attachment was sort of immediate when I first saw footage. It was in a attachment seminar, and I got goosebumps all over my whole body. And it was I just started my PhD in performance studies. It was one of the first courses I took, and then I sort of realized that seemed to be the case with all the researchers. And it's pretty uncanny watching the films. They kind of unfold slowly, but it brings a lot of things up emotionally for folks. And so it's been interesting to understand the ways in which these forms of practice looking emerge out of people's own experiences. Their love stories. You're watching this whole narrative arc. They losing and finding your object is the primary theme of almost all cultural production. Your favorite films and books and things like that. So they're watching many versions of that over and over again and categorizing it and so forth.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that great talk. I was really fascinated by a lot of it, and I have several questions, but I think I'm going to just go to one of them that has to do with because Evelyn Fox Keller seems to be with us here in our conversation, and there's somewhere in her many writings that I read where she talks about the kind of introjection of the machine as a kind of. Do you know where this happens? No. I feel like I read this and then I keep on trying to track it down. Anyway, my question is not what I'm wondering about. Yes, I'm wondering about introjection and its relation to attachment theory. And if you can just tell me a little bit about, because I know a lot about Kleinian introjection, I don't really know where that concept went in the Bowlby Ainsworth trajectory. So I would appreciate that if you had something to say about it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it does get to one of the heart of the conflicts that between the sort of emergent disagreements that emerged between Bowlby and the psychoanalytic folks. Klein in particular, he sort of became ostracized from that community. And I think where it shows up, and I think it's a valid critique from the psychoanalyst that we sort of lose something about the dynamic unconscious with attachment theory, attachment theory has a lot more to do with form than content. And psychoanalysis has particularly been interested in analyzing content, aesthetically, but less so with form. And so I think that's actually one of the things that attachment has to contribute is a sort of a theory of form in the way that we come into time and space and so forth. But in any case, I think it shows up in the idea of internal working models in attachment theory, which is the sort of representations of interactions that have been generalized and then become working models, sort of operating instructions for us relationally over the course of our lives. So they call them attachment patterns with the infants, which are emergent between the infant and the caregiver. And then as adults, they call them attachment styles. So they make a distinction between patterns and styles. So if you go to the NPR quiz, you search that up, you'll find attachment styles. But they roughly correlate with the infant ones. But in any case, they believe that it's internal, what they call internal working models, which is sort of like a bland concept that they have, that it really works as a black box. So even among the attachment researchers, they use internal working models, but they kind of hate it because it's a black box and no one really knows how that mediation process works exactly, and they can't figure out quite the way to study it. Great question.
Hi, Eric. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, hi.
I'm interested in whether you want to add a fourth object to your list, which would be the Mystic Writing Pad.
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask that is I'd like you to go back around and convince me, because this is a Derridian question, right? So I want you to convince me why the subject has moved from being, or why the human has moved from being a postmodern subject to a postmodern subscriber. Because I think Derrida's reading of the Mystic Writing Pad is an argument that the machinic and the death that the machinic has always been there, right? So there isn't a new, for Derrida, there wouldn't be a new event. It would be a new realization of an event, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you go back around and just do that for me?
That's a lovely question. I wish I could do more flips. I'm not that agile, but I love that question. You know, I think of the attachment stuff also in light of like the desiring machines, you know, like that you get from Deleuze and Guattari. I think they, you know, as much as they sort of critique the Oedipalization of everything, they actually go so far as to say that we should still actually look into attachment as a particular form of desiring production. They don't do much beyond that, you know, as far as I understand, except implicitly. But, you know, I just liked Derrida's comment. It's in this strange film where he's playing himself as this professor, and he has this long exchange with this sort of young French journalist or something, and he starts saying all these strange things about psychoanalysis, one of which is that it's the science of ghosts. And it was a really uncanny experience when I was learning to code these films, because you don't code the strange situation live, you code it on a film. So it's already dead almost, right? But you're also reanimating these same scenes. Everybody's trained on the same 10 scenes, you know, from the 90s, 80s and things like that. And they're kind of degraded quality, but you're watching everything really, really closely. It goes forward and back and you get these blurry effects, and it's pretty uncanny. You know, you can't really control it as well as you want to on a mouse pad. They used to do it on 60 millimeter film. So you would roll back and forth with the motions that you would see in the film. But that's not how they code it anymore. So anyhow, the whole effect very much lined up with what Derrida was saying about psychoanalysis and film being the science of ghosts. But I think, yeah, you know, I think attachment's all about death, actually. But that's as far as I could get around to answering your question. I know it wasn't great. Attachment wards off the fear of death, right? Or the inevitability of it and separation and so forth. Hi there.
Hi, Eric. So I just Googled your profile and saw that you are also, sorry about that. You're also a systems family therapist. Is that right?
Well, my clinical training was initially in, you know, family therapy. So my license is marriage and family therapist. So I got some system stuff. I wouldn't by any means, I'm more familiar with psychodynamic and psychoanalytic theory than systems theory, but yeah. Yeah.
So I was wondering, so when you're looking at the attachment theory archive, and do you see anything in response to, you know, the cybernetic understanding of systems, family systems and stuff like that? And how do you think they could be used together in a therapeutic condition?
Yeah, it's an interesting question about how attachment theory becomes operationalized as a, you know, in clinical work. People will say they're attachment-based therapists, but it's not really clear what that would mean exactly, except that they take attachment seriously, I guess. In regard to family systems, I think in some ways family systems therapy got there before the rest of the sort of clinical licenses, because they were really trying to work with the entire family, understanding that the individual is produced by a society of other, you know, individuals and bodies and objects and so forth. And so, but I think a lot of marriage and family therapists, at least the folks in my field, would say that they're informed by attachment theory, but I'm not sure that any of them have any sort of particular clinical training you can get training in like infant other interaction. So you're working with infants and their mothers and that kind of stuff. It's not very common. Yeah, I did a lot of community-based work with families. So, you know, I'd spend 2 years with a family, sort of become a member of the family, and you're trying to work psychodynamically, but it's very messy because you're in their home and things like that. So it becomes, yeah, it's a tricky question about how to integrate it. That would have to be, you know, a longer answer, and we could look at a case study, you know, kind of like, yeah, you were doing. Yeah, that's about all I could say.
I would like to explore shitty genealogies, but we're going to have to do away with you for now and move on to the next speaker. So thank you.
So much. Thank you for the questions too. That was lovely.
So, no, cancel. That's right. Next up is Andrea Bialy, The Battle for Sleep and Dreams.
Hello, everyone. I am going to share with you some ideas. It's a work in progress. I'm a professor at the School of Psychology in La Universidad de la República in Uruguay. Uruguay is a little country that is in the middle of Argentina and Brazil. We are only 3 million people. We come from a very psychoanalytic region. I can say that El Río de la Plata, it's really a psychoanalytic region. So I will start. In this paper, I will go through the debates and tensions between neurosciences and psychoanalysis. I will focus in what is going on in the Rio de la Plata region, an epistemological milieu strongly influenced by psychoanalysis. And I will try to answer the question of whether neuropsychoanalysis is a new way in which part of psychoanalysis has found to relate to the basic sciences, and what this tells us about also of the possible relations between different kinds of knowledge. I will start saying that much of the science of sleep that was consolidated during the 20th century developed in express opposition to the Freudian conception of dreams and sleeps. Authors such as Alan Hobson and Michel Jouvet directly confronting psychoanalytic explanation with neuroscientific explanations, pointing out that the inutility of psychoanalysis to understand sleeps and dreams. Some of their criticisms directly attack the foundations of the model of dream made by Freud or proposed by Freud. Especially, they say there's no need to interpret dreams. Dreams are clear, and so the idea of the unconscious is not necessary to understand what happens when people are dreaming. But in recent years, a new discipline has emerged, neuropsychoanalysis, which attempts to establish a link between the two perspectives and has also proposed an harmonized view between psychoanalysis and neurosciences in dreaming. And there are two positions about neurosciences. While proponents of neuropsychoanalysis seek to develop a specific conceptual corpus to combine the contributions of neuroscience and psychoanalysis with the aim of demonstrating the neuroscientific findings are relevant and important for the development and justification of psychoanalytic theory and practice. On the other hand, other psychoanalysts have a clear battle against neurosciences in general and neuropsychoanalysis in particular, denouncing the risk of distorting Freudian theory. A clear example of these two opposing positions was the debate that took place between 2007 and 2016 through the International Journal of Psychoanalysis of the International Psychoanalytic Association. The paper that started the debate in 2007 argued that it was necessary to articulate the case against, this is a quotation, against the neuropsychoanalytic trend because underlying the debate was the relevance of neuroscience to psychoanalysis. There lies a struggle over the essential nature of psychoanalytic theory and practice. There were several responses, papers, and counter-responses that followed the first article in 2007. Many of them written by important psychoanalysts like Canestri, the Italian psychoanalyst, or Mark Solms, the psychoanalyst that founded the International Association of Neuropsychoanalysis, for example. But what happens in the Rio de la Plata region? Mentions to the intersection between psychoanalysis and neurosciences among the psychoanalysts of the Rio de la Plata can be traced back to the beginning of the year 2000. Most of them are presentations made at congresses or seminars, and the papers published in psychoanalytic journals developed the subject are really scarce, little published on the theme. There are no explicit traces of the debate that took place in the International Journal of Psychoanalysis, and really very few mentions to neuropsychoanalysis itself. However, the same cannot be said to have occurred in relation to neuropsychoanalysis and its controversies in Argentina and Uruguay. While in Argentina, the Psychoanalytic Association of Buenos Aires has set up in recent years an area of neuropsychoanalysis, neurosciences, and psychoanalysis that holds monthly academic meetings. The Argentine Psychoanalytic Association reproduces in its journals articles written by Mark Solms and also Jorge Canestri in support of neuropsychoanalysis. In Uruguay, reference to these fields are really minimal. In Uruguay, issues on psychoanalysis and neurosciences are mainly addressed by some members of the Uruguayan Psychoanalytic Association, especially those who fulfill the double condition of being psychiatrists and psychoanalysis. In Uruguay, like in Argentina, there's no need to be an MD to be a psychoanalyst. So this is true. During a good part of the years 2000s, the different works covered from the attention deficit disorder and its relation to neurosciences and psychoanalysis, empathy, psychoanalysis and neurosciences, neurosciences and therapeutic bond, body-mind relations, etc. This work tried to emphasize the contribution of neurosciences to psychoanalysis and set a tone for the discussion that can be appreciated in the title of one of the few published papers of the series, Psychoanalysis and Neurosciences, a possible or impossible articulation. In fact, we will have to wait until last year for the first article, the paper dedicated to neuropsychoanalysis to appear in La Revista Uruguaya de Psychoanálisis in a special volume on dreams. There, among a number of articles covering topics such as psychoanalytic vision of dreams, or there was an interview by one of the members of the association with the neuroscientist Siddhartha Ribeiro. The title is suggestive, Talking with Neurosciences, interview with Siddhartha Ribeiro, in Spanish, Conversando con la Neurociencia. Siddhartha Ribeiro is in fact a biologist converted to neurosciences. He is the head of the Brain Institute of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil. He's a winner of several awards and a columnist in the most important newspaper in Sao Paulo. The interview can be considered a gesture that reveals a certain intention of the part of the Uruguayan Psychoanalytic Association. First of all, to establish a friendly dialogue. This can be seen in the titles, since the word conversation or conversación in Spanish means to talk friendly with another person. And secondly, give the idea of the reapproachment. But the interesting thing is that in this point, the interview reveals the limits of the approach, not by the intervention of the interviewee, but by the intervention of the interviewers. And this is how is the first appearance of the metaphor or the dialogue metaphor in some works I'm going to discuss with you. There's another paper where the dialogue metaphor between psychoanalysis and neurosciences also appears in an article written by one of the few people in Uruguay who considers themselves a neuropsychoanalyst. His name is Lisandro Valles. He's a workmate. He works in the same faculty I work. In an article published in 2020 in the Pan American Journal of Neuropsychoanalysis, entitled Neuropsychoanalysis, a Step Further, Football Dialogue Between Psychoanalysis and Neurosciences. But the dialogue metaphor is found again in the scientific activity and a talk that you can find in YouTube where he speaks again. And the talk is entitled Dialogues Between Psychoanalysis and Neurosciences, Heresies of Neuropsychoanalysis. Well, the paper article and the YouTube presentation made similar arguments to legitimize neuropsychoanalysis. These arguments are that the dialogue between neurosciences and psychoanalysis is not new, that dates back to the time of the creator of psychoanalysis, that neurosciences in the time of Freud didn't allow him to establish a model of the psyche localized in the brain, but that now, given the advances in neurosciences, will be at the historical moment that Freud had predicated in 1915 in his text, The Unconscious, that can make the disconnection between brain and mental activity and unconscious activity. A slightly different and more synthetic version of the same argument can be found in the interview with Siddhartha Ribeiro, who states that Freud will not be very happy with the divorce between psychoanalysis and neurosciences. He also alludes to the idea that the limitations of neuroscientific knowledge and its techniques in the historical time in which Freud lived explain the truncated process that unite neurosciences, psychoanalysis, and empirical. And this is a quotation. He says, I believe that if Freud had access to a functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner, he will be using it. Both statements are indeed a new version of what Eric Kandel's idea, he proposed the idea in 1999, that the process of scientific psychology written by Freud in 1895 can today be accomplished. Well, both papers, the interview to Siddhartha Ribeiro, place dream as the best example to show how neurosciences can corroborate psychoanalytic findings. Siddhartha Ribeiro points out that neurosciences have found the neurological correlates of some elements of the dream identified by Freud as Day's residues. Valles argued that neurodynamics of dream, which articulates the brain areas, are activated during sleep with Freud's definitions of dream. So we can explain, also prove that the mechanisms of displacement and condensation involved in dream formation. In short, both underline the neurosciences can prove several aspects of the Freudian model of the dream. But what kind of dialogue is this? I want to focus on two passages, one in the interview to Siddhartha Ribeiro. The interviewer, Viviana Romano, the member of the Uruguayan Psychoanalytic Association, states that when she read The Oracle of the Night, the book written by Siddhartha Ribeiro, she was very moved by the story of Siddhartha Ribeiro as a child who, faced with the abrupt death of his father, begins to have very distressing nightmares. She wonders then if there is an incompatibility between psychoanalysis and neurosciences. She remembers a psychoanalyst, whom she does not name, we don't know who he is, who said that neurosciences are dedicated to see how a radio works, the electromagnetic waves, the transmitter, the receivers, while psychoanalysts listen to the Beethoven symphony. The other moment I would like to point out is that when Lisandro Valles makes his intervention in the seminar entitled Dialogues Between Psychoanalysis and Neurosciences, Heresies or Neuropsychoanalysis, he explains that when he did his PhD in cognitive neurosciences, he made a mistake of saying that he loved neuropsychoanalysis. From that moment on, he she says. He became a persona non grata for some of the directors of the programs, but also some of the psychoanalytic colleagues told him that what he was doing was heresy. So again, what kind of dialogue is this? I think that the papers and materials I have been reviewing have a particularity of stressing some paradoxical characteristics of the way in which the relationship between neurosciences and psychoanalysis are presented. First, at the level of knowledge, as two disciplines that need each other insofar as the findings of neurosciences can prove the psychoanalytic theory, but also at the level of affections, appealing to what Freud would have wished to your nightmares as a child or to what colleagues say about each other. When I was preparing the presentation, I thought, well, how can we explain this term or these two levels, the knowledge level and the affective level? And I tried to think with the notion that Isabel Stenger proposed, the idea of politics of science, the notion that politics of knowledge allow us to take into account the theoretical and epistemological autonomies or dependencies between different sciences of knowledge in aspects such as epistemic guarantee and the definition of objects. I think that the encounter between psychoanalysis and neurosciences takes place in a scenario of political operation, which gives the shape the possible modes of linking between one and another, and especially in dreams. Dreams emerge, as we have seen, as a shared and shareable object, a way where this encounter can be made or can happen. But there are other aspects beyond the epistemic one come into play, in which political operations, I think, are also affective operations. The relation between neurosciences and psychoanalysis can also be understood as a politic of affects. And I don't really know how to explain this, because what I have seen is that when people want to say they are disagreeing, they just make the move and start to talk about affects. Like the interviews made when she was talking with Siddhartha, she was saying there's some incommensurability between psychoanalysis and neurosciences, and I will talk with you about your experience of your nightmare. Well, these are the questions I'm making myself, and thank you. I don't know if I understood what you're really asking. All the debate goes around the idea that both neurosciences and psychoanalysis can be reinforced or powerful when they get together. Yeah. But the debate is that in some way, when you do this, you are betraying some of the ideas of what psychoanalysis is. That's the debate. Okay. And what I was telling it, even if maybe both sciences can benefit from that, the discussion is not only in the level of epistemological objects, but it's also in the level of what people say to each other in an affective way.
Perhaps you can repeat the questions too, if possible. Sorry to be annoying, but I've lost audio completely on my end.
Put me two more. Psychoanalysts and the neuroscientists, or the neuroscience need the psychoanalyst.
Well, I don't think I can answer that. Who needs more? Because that's the problem. There's some people in psychoanalysis say that they need neurosciences, and others say that they know, because they say that the psychoanalysis is not a science. So why will they need neurosciences? Yeah, Siddhartha. Yes, the one that I was talking about. Yeah, because he's a Brazilian who's a neuroscientist, and he is very interested in psychoanalysis. So he says that psychoanalysis can shed light to the way neurosciences make research. Okay.
Thank you, Andrea. Which brings us to our last presentation, which is Elizabeth Wilson from Emory University, using violating psychoanalysis and the neurocognitive sciences. Do you want to stand or do you want to sit?
I'm going to stand.
Good.
Yeah. Eric, can you?
I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't have a PowerPoint. Thank you, Mike, and thank you for bringing us all together. This has been a really great unraveling of different perspectives, like the diversity of what people are doing here has been really fascinating. So I'm going to begin with a few words of context. I'm actually currently working on a project about how negativity is handled by feminist theory. My framing hypothesis is that feminist theorists deal with negativity rather poorly. There's a tendency to disown our own negativity, our own violence, our own destructiveness. And I'm specifically writing about negative states of mind, not negativity in general. So it's a psychological project. And in particular, right now, I'm working on questions of anger. So when you look at the feminist literatures, it's pretty clear that feminists tend to idealize our anger as politically creative. There's insufficient attention, I'm arguing, to the destructive force of our anger. So Sylvan Tompkins, for example, argues, he says of anger, that the primary function of anger is to make bad matters worse. And secondly, to increase the probability of more anger. So there's something for Tompkins that's super toxic about anger, and how it gets co-assembled with other things is kind of really interesting, but at its base, it's a negative affect for Tompkins. So a lot of idealization of this negative affect. Alongside Tompkins, psychoanalysis is going to be one of the primary theoretical frames for addressing destructive states of mind. So I'm currently deep in the psychoanalytic literatures about destructiveness and the death drive. So I've been reading some Freud, I've been reading some Klein, some Winnicott, and belatedly coming in behind Adam, I'm trying to start reading some Bion. So I'm trying to figure out how this psychoanalytic work could be used to intervene in these feminist theoretical questions about destructiveness and anger. So so that's the background. What I want to do today is I want to see how some of this analysis about destructiveness plays out in relation to exactly what Andrea's just been talking about, how it plays out in relation to bringing the neurosciences and psychoanalysis into contact with one another. So here's the central question: how is destructiveness being managed in the attempts to synthesize psychoanalysis and the neurosciences? As a lot of people have kind of intimated today, synthetic projects like this that merge psychoanalysis with something else often lose contact with the early psychoanalytic work on destructiveness and negativity, which of course is not much of a surprise. There is clearly something very challenging about keeping an eye on negativity. We tend to avoid it or project it onto others when we can. So that's by way of situating where I'm standing. So what specifically I want to do today is I want to discuss what I'm calling an epistemological fantasy that I see circulating in the relationship of psychoanalysis and neuroscience in these new synthetic projects. I'm just going to read a particular example of this. The fantasy comes in the opening pages of a book that's called Affect Regulation, Mentalization, and the Development of Self. It's a 2002 book, Affect Regulation, Mentalization, and the Development of Self. It's authored by Peter Fonagy, Gail Gergely, Elliot Jurist, and Mary Tajay. They are US and UK based clinicians. I'm just going to refer going forward to this bunch of people as Peter Fonagy. I'm just going to use the primary author as the name for all of this. So a 2002 book that has become massively influential, or was massively influential when it was published 20 years ago. And it brings together psychoanalytic theory, neuroscientific data, and psychological models of affect and attachment, as Eric was talking about, in order to build a conceptual synthesis that could be used as a new model for clinical treatment. So the book is specifically oriented towards questions of treatment. The book and most of the research, subsequent research by these authors, has been interested especially in the treatment of difficult clinical cases, borderline states, for example. And this is a return it's a return of sorts to the beginning of Freud's work, as Andrea was pointing out, in the 1880s and 1890s. It's a return in two ways. I mean, not only is Freud's early work already an amalgam of neuroscience and psychological theory and emotional attunement in a way that they're trying to revivify in 2002. So it's a return in that way. But at the same time, secondly, Freud was also dealing with what might now be called treatment-resistant patients. He was often considered the clinician of last resort for patients who no one else had been able to help, patients that clinicians and others experienced as extremely difficult to contact emotionally, very hard to build a therapeutic bond. One word for such patients might be destructive. So here is the fantasy, here is the epistemological fantasy in the 2002 volume. Mentioned only in passing, but I think it provides a largely unspoken but nonetheless crucial frame for the research and clinical program that follows. And this is a quote from earlier in the book. It is clear that psychological principles cannot violate the limitations set by the neurophysiological capacities of the systems that subserve them. Let me say that again. It is clear that psychological principles cannot violate the limitations set by the neurophysiological capabilities of the systems that subserve them. Now, at first glance, it's a completely uncontentious claim. Psychological claims or psychoanalytic claims and neurophysiological claims need to be compatible in broad terms. They need to come together in some way that is productive and will generate something new. And this is one of the goals that Fonagy and these other authors have, is to find common ground amongst groups of usually divergent epistemologies. So all of that, to my mind, completely uncontentious and is kind of running in the background for what I'm about to say. So the fantasy that I'm interested in here focuses on the question of violation. And to repeat what they say, psychological principles cannot violate the limits set by neurophysiology. Now, violate is a particularly strong word to be using in these circumstances. The book itself is very sober in tone, and it's not polemical at all. It's very careful. So it's a very strong word to be using. The first meaning of the word violate in the OED is rape. But more broadly, violate means to pollute or spoil to treat without respect, to defile a sacred thing, to intrude, disrupt, or damage by violent force. So what Fonagy is arguing is that psychoanalytic principles cannot spoil or disrupt the limitations set by neurophysiology. So that's the fantasy. And here's my response to this. I'm just going to say this is untenable, right? So my argument is that a non-violative relation is an untenable frame for thinking neuroscience and psychoanalysis together. Fonagy and his colleagues have a number of ways of figuring the relationship between psychoanalysis and neurophysiology. By and large, just to summarize this, these relations are understood in fairly benign terms. They have the feeling of a well-negotiated alliance, balanced, integrated, reconciled. So dialogues, as you were talking about them. So it's like everybody's already very well analyzed at this point. So I'm suggesting that we need some way of reading for and interpreting the destructive or corrosive fantasies that are also a part of any psychoanalytic neuroscientific assemblage. If we're going to build these models, and I think the Fonagy work is fantastic. Like I think I'm talking about because I think it's so strong, it's so compelling. So if we're going to build models like this, and I think it's important that we do, the fantasy of a non-violative space needs to be further interpreted, and fantasies of destructiveness, I think, are going to require further elaboration. So to start unpacking that, one thing that these kinds of models like Fonagy's are going to have to be able to do is accommodate mutual relatedness between psychoanalysis and the neurosciences. These epistemologies are going to have to be open to each other. And one of the great lessons of the psychoanalytic canon is that openness and mutuality are necessarily disruptive, damaging, spoiling. They are not only that. They are not only destructive, damaging, and spoiling, and they needn't be consciously destructive, damaging, or spoiling. Nonetheless, some part of the infrastructure of relationality always has these elements in it. And so I think a couple of people have mentioned Berlant's inconvenience of other people, and word inconvenience for Berlant is doing that work of what have I said, destructiveness, the damage of the spoiling of the difficulty of being with other people. So it's always there. For authors in the Kleinian tradition, mutuality is often destructive and, importantly, frightening. With varying degrees of intensity, envy, frustration, and greed are a core part of fantasy. And under some circumstances, and when left to circulate without interpretation, envy, frustration, and greed can come to dominate sense of mutuality. To go back to your question about who needs who most, there's the envy and the greed's there, right? So these things can come to dominate scenes of mutuality. It's never good objects and good epistemologies all the way down. At some point, an engagement with destructiveness is unavoidable. Indeed, the fantasies of a landscape populated only by good objects, objects that only play nicely, is itself a violation of destructiveness. So this would be the curling back of the Kleinian interpretation on itself, is that to the extent that people want to avoid and deny that destructiveness is here, you're violating the force of destructiveness itself. So you're trying to destroy destructiveness. So, in that Kleinian vein, you can't get away from it. So Klein. Winnicott thought about the complexity of these relationships, also their necessarily spoiling nature. And he did this under the rubric of the transitional object, which we just heard Eric talking about. Winnicott says of the transitional object, and here I'm quoting, because it's usually thought, I know with my students, with my undergraduates, when you talk about transitional objects, it's like, oh, teddy bears, right? Yes, but Winnicott says of this object that it is, quote, affectionately cuddled, as well as excitedly loved and mutilated. It must survive instinctual loving and also hating, and, if it be a feature, pure aggression. We all know what we did with our teddy bears. No. Let's end the quote. Well managed, it is these phenomena that allow us to begin the process of using people relationally rather than narcissistically. What these encounters realize for us, if we're lucky, is the paradox that objects and people can survive destruction, The blanket will survive my grasping and sucking. My parent will survive my excited mutilation. My analyst will survive my rage. These circumstances of excited and mutilating love are the conditions, I'm arguing, under which I can be in a relationship of mutuality with my blanket, with my parent, with my analyst, and with others. I can use them. In her magnificent reading of Winnicott and the use of people and objects, Barbara Johnson distinguishes between two kinds of use. Use that is an abuse of power on the one hand, and use in the Winnicottian sense. Her examples of uses that are abuses of power include, and here I'm quoting, the violence of colonial, sexual, and even epistemological appropriation. That's her quote. So on the one hand, abuses of power, and on the other hand, use in the Winnicottian sense are the conditions under which the subject emerges through its engagement with others. For Johnson, openness between participants will be generative of pleasure, but also of peril. Winnicott, of course, was acutely aware of this peril. In his powerful paper about hate and the countertransference, he spells out how menacing that openness to another can be. Taking the mother-infant dyad as his template for the difficulties of encountering another, he lists the following as some of the reasons why a mother hates her baby. And one of Winnicott's great responses to Klein, the baby hates its mother in Klein. And Winnicott wants to say that the mother hates the baby way before the baby hates the mother, right? So the mother gets in first. And here's the list of why. This is just the list goes on in this vein. This is a quote. He, the baby, this is why the mother hates the baby. Quote, he, the baby, is ruthless. He treats her like scum, an unpaid servant. He tries to hurt her, periodically bite her, and all in the name of love. That's the end of the quote. And the destructiveness of the baby to the mother, it's quite a long list. In particular, in this paper, Winnicott warns against mobilizing sentimentality in the face of the parents' hatred of their baby. I'm quoting, sentimentality is useless for parents as it contains a denial of hate. It seems to me doubtful, this is still Winnicott, it seems to me doubtful whether a human child as he develops is capable of tolerating the full extent of his own hate in a sentimental context. So Johnson concludes her just amazingly good reading of Winnicott by suggesting, and here I'm quoting, perhaps a synonym for using people would be paradoxically trusting people, creating a space of play and risk that does not depend on maintaining intactness and separation, end of quote. So to return to the Fonagy neuroscience stuff, in some ways, the Fonagy synthesis of neuroscience and psychoanalysis actually does maintain the intactness and separation of these two epistemological bodies, even in the moment it's declaring their merger into this new singular model, clinical practice. I think in the Johnsonian sense, there is no trust between psychoanalysis and the neurosciences, or at least trust has been sentimentalized. There is little sense of robust play between psychoanalytic knowledges and neuroscientific ones, because the question of how these two bodies of work spoil each other, how they might excitedly love each other, has not yet received enough attention. It's not at all clear, for example, and this is, I mean, you'll know this from reading literature, this is a thing that's said over and over and over again as a critique of the neuropsychoanalysis, is where is the unconscious and where is sexuality? They both tend to just drop to one side, and Eric mentioned this in relation to attachment theory as well. So by and large, I think, Fonagy and his colleagues, despite, I think, the glory of the synthesis that they have put together, still shield the neurosciences from any contact with the strangeness of psychoanalytic principles. So, and just to pick up on the strangeness, and the background, of course, of all of these concerns about destructiveness is beyond the pleasure principle, and Freud's suggestion that there is some demonic force, a death drive at work in us. At a crucial point in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, having established evidence for the compulsion to repeat the Fort Da business with the real, Freud begins a chapter by saying, and here I'm quoting, what follows is speculation, often far-fetched speculation. It's going to be stupefying, I guess. End of quote. And a large part of his focus from that point on, so what the signaling of speculation brings onto the stage, what follows is a lot of engagement with biological data, So he talks a lot about Wiseman's division of living substance into a germ and a soma. He talks a lot about the conjugation and the reproduction of protozoa. And he talks a lot, of course, about, if I had more time, I could get into this, the cortex forms where the internal and the external worlds of the organism meet. So a cortex is a layer between the inside and the outside to make life bearable. So central to Freud's far-fetched speculations is his disagreement that death is something that arrives secondarily at scenes of life, bringing them to a close. Rather, for Freud, death emerges with life. They both arrive at the same time. Death, or the destruction of organisms, is associated with life from the very start, he says. The entwining of life and death is not one of benign cohabitation. How could it be? It is rather a violative relation in which each succumbs to and works against the other. So by way of kind of pulling this together to conclude, thinking psychoanalytically, it's not clear that there are relations, interpersonal relations or epistemological relations, that don't have some violence in them. Sorry, that's a double negative. Let me say that again. Thinking psychoanalytically, all relations, be they interpersonal or epistemological, have some kind of violence in them. It seems that one conclusion that we can draw from Freudian or Kleinian or Winnicottian traditions is that ruthless use and violation will be inevitable in scenes of psychoanalytic and neurocognitive association. Where Johnson focuses on the value of willingly being used by another, and she differentiates this from exploitation, and I think this is kind of one of the great moves in that paper. Nonetheless, I would like us to consider how weak and improbable the distinction often is between willing and unwilling use amongst us. If we can see that psychoanalytic principles do indeed violate the epistemological limits set down by the neurocognitive sciences, if we can see that psychoanalysis sometimes ruthlessly uses the neurocognitive sciences and vice versa, then what kinds of mutuality might we expect to emerge between them if the violative nature of this relationship was given more interpretive space? So I'm interested in what could happen if fantasies of destructiveness weren't shut down and closed off, if they could be part of our far-fetched speculations, even if it is only in very particular circumstances that the conditions arise in which we can believe in such primordial violation and then momentarily abide the perilous conditions of mutual use. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, yeah, well, perhaps. I think the neuroscientists are clearly trying to violate psychoanalysis. They're clearly trying to say, oh, come on, with your dreams and your unconscious, like, stop it. So it's very clear that the violation is going that way. And I think, I mean, you might have more to say about this, but there's something kind of abject about the servile way in which so many psychoanalysts have said, no, we can fit in with you. We can accommodate what's going on here. And I think if I just went at it a little harder, something kind of interesting could emerge out of that. So yeah, maybe, I don't know who needs who. They both deserve each other. Would that be another way of saying it?
Can I ask a question here, or is someone asking a question already?
Yeah, sorry. I'll get Amanda to come up. Do you want to come up talking to the mic so Eric can see?
Okay, and then I want to be on the list for a question too.
I'm also going to stop the share.
So I was thinking of Hilary Dodson, and you can find a profile on the Scarfree Foundation. And she taught me, she came from neuroscience academic background, moved into becoming a psychoanalyst, so supervising training analyst. And I was also thinking on the other side of the Bowlby Center, where Susie Orbach is the patron, and the work that they're doing in terms of
their specific trainings on trauma and attachment theory and what goes on with deep trauma. Because I think the Fonagy book does lay out some very pragmatic ways. I mean, I've worked with the manual, so yeah. So I just wanted to kind of think about the ways in which it's moved. One person I've met who's come from neuroscience into psychoanalysis, and then psychoanalysis pulling neuroscience. But yeah, so just wanted to share that.
No, that's super interesting. And I think that since Mark Soames and whatnot set up the Neuropsychoanalysis Journal in the 1990s or whenever that was, yeah, the whole field has moved and it has become more complex. But I think, I mean, to use a STS term, I think consilience is still what rules the field. Like the idea that if we're inconvenient in small ways to each other, we'll eventually hit something, which I think is the driving force in the Fonagy. He just wants something that works, and he's a clinician, and Godspeed, right? Like that should be what's going on there. But I think, I'm not a clinician, so that's not my side of the field, So academically, and this is what relates to my feminist concerns, is I'm always just on edge when people won't fully look at and interpret destructiveness. Yeah, and so I think what's on the other side of a good interpretation of my destructiveness is kind of a freedom. It's like, oh my God, yes. And so there's something that unfolds on the other side of that is not undestructive, but the denial of destructiveness is so corrosive to growth, epistemologically, personally. And I still think that, I mean, this is true with a lot of interdisciplinary work, right? Like there's just a drive that we all get along. There was a question way up back. Do you want to come up and?
Eric,
Oh, okay. All right, Eric, go.
Hi there. I knew Liz was going to get in here with the negativity stuff, and I'm so pleased about that. I mean, I love this Winnicott essay, where you have to destroy an object for it to become real, destroy it in fantasy for it to become real. And he's talking about going from object usage or object relating to object usage. It almost seems backwards, but he's saying we start in object relating and we develop into object usage by destroying our object and finding out that it still exists. And so I found that fascinating, your use of that. But I also really like your sort of concern about the idealization of anger, the productivity of anger. But I found myself, as you move through the Winnicott piece, coming back to that same dilemma, which at the end it becomes productive. So like, where's the negativity if that's part of the attachment process, for example, is destroying the object and finding out that it's real, that that your destruction won't destroy it. And then that's how you become real too, essentially. But it's still, the anger still becomes productive there somehow.
Well, I mean, can you answer that clinically? I mean, it seems to me that the destructiveness is still there. It's now just interpreted destructiveness. And I think uninterpreted destructiveness is unnecessarily toxic. So there's always that toxicity of destructiveness there. But I think it requires not one, but ongoing interpretations. And I think feminists in particular, we're really good at other people's destructiveness. Like all of that interpretive energy very effectively deployed out in the world, but it's not great closer to home. We're not really good at doing it in relation to ourselves. And I think that we need epistemologies, and this is to get away from neuroscience stuff, but I think we need epistemologies in feminism that will look at our own destructiveness.
Yeah.
Is that what our,
well, it's right. I love it because it's right in line with the critique of attachment theory when it first emerged. Like, where's like aggression? What happens to aggression? What happens to sexuality? And it just sort of disappears, and that's why that is why they need each other. But I'm also, I like your concern about the servile nature of the way that psychoanalysts are approaching neuroscience. It has that feel, at least from where I'm standing.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, not all of them. I mean, as Andrea was saying, there's been a lot of different kinds of opinions, right? Some psychoanalysts have said, I don't want any part of this. Others have just dived right in. Others are a little indifferent. When I go to clinical conferences, I hear a lot of kind of really loosely metaphoric uses of psychoanalysis. And people talk about frontal lobes, and it's like, to go back to your thing, Eric, about like, does anyone actually know what a frontal lobe is? you know, or what it does or what the contemporary research says. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things going on there. And I think a frame of destructiveness or anger might help kind of sort that out a little bit, with the emphasis on a little bit, you know. No, he's yeah. Do you want to come up and talk so Eric can hear you?
Thanks for the great presentation. I'm coming at this from a more of an history of science point of view, and I'm wondering about the specificities about the relationship between psychoanalysis and neuroscience, because they seem to share a history, right? So that already presuppose some kind of mutual interest, and that you also see in phenomenology in neuroscience, and there you also see this very aggressive relationship, more or less, right? So we don't want you in, we need to keep the neurosciences out, for instance. Whereas if you look at fields like theology and marketing, you also have things like neurotheology, neuromarketing, and then neuroscience is like, oh, hey, yeah, sure, we open the door, right? And marketing people are like, okay, sure, this definitely gives us better information. So there seems to be that this relationship between the two is not productive at all for neuroscience, I guess. Whereas in this case, precisely because there is this destructiveness already, that there is some kind of mutuality already here. So I'm thinking here that the destruction is productive in this particular context.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if my question makes sense.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I don't know from marketing. I don't know what's going on there, but this, I don't know, to put it in really simplistic terms, I really don't see how they're going to build a neuropsychoanalysis without a theory of the unconscious. So in this sense, I'm a Juliet Mitchell person, that there's two things you have to have in psychoanalytic theory: a theory of the unconscious and a theory of sexuality. And they're both kind of absent a little bit, Eric, right, in attachment theory. And you can have a really successful epistemology of marketing and not have a theory of either the unconscious or sexuality, I presume, right? Well, sorry, semi-successful. Yeah, maybe your marketing would be better if you had that, but you can proceed, and a little bit what you've been talking about. You can proceed kind of without it. I don't see how you can proceed psychoanalytically from starting principles unless there's a theory of an unconscious that's going to absolutely fuck with the rationality of neuroscientific work, right? So what needs to happen, and this is what I've thought about in the past, is you need to get into the neuroscience and see how it's a little twisted, that it's not as straight down the lines it thinks it is. Like there's a whole lot of weird stuff going on there too. And so if I can find their weirdness together, then maybe something can happen. And I mean, the history question, Freud was very critical of the neuroscience of his day, right? Like he was like, hey, this localizationism, I don't know. He wrote a whole book on childhood aphasia, and was very critical of all those debates that were going on around the 1880s about the relation between the brain and the mind. I mean, it's super interesting, right? Like it's super interesting how this thing is going to play itself out. And so I guess all I'm arguing is I would like a bit more roughhouse in the whole thing, like some actual roughhousing and some interpretation of the roughhousing as it proceeds. Does that? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Shall I sit down? Do we want to open this to a general discussion? What can I detach this? Is this going to run? Look at this. Look at this. I can like.
But the microphone is here for Eric, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Let's just try it.
Let's sit down and try that and see if it works.
Eric, I'm going to sit down. Tell me if Stop. Can you still hear me?
Not really. Well, you,
yeah.
you, maybe.
My question, I'm not sure what I'm doing with this. Liz, this has to do with the question that was asked before about subjectivity, and whether you think, I mean, what does so it's interesting to think that the South American context for psychoanalysis has more prestige, permits a kind of reciprocal, or the beginnings of some more possibly reciprocal relationship between these two fields, right? I think that has something to do with it. Maybe, I don't know the details. But in the context of North America, it seems that, like, what does neuroscience want from psychoanalysis? And then, like, in the context of thinking through questions of destructiveness, does neuroscience, does it have a notion of subjectivity? Like, is there a subject that emerges from the neurosciences at all? I don't quite know what it is. And is it not then, facing destruction, or in the sense of, so there's what's at stake?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I hadn't quite thought of this, but I think this is right. Like, I think that the synthesis of neuroscience and psychoanalysis in Anglophone contexts is much less interesting than what's going on, perhaps in the South American context. And also, there's this book called The Biology of Freedom that is co-authored by, let's say, a French psychoanalyst and a Italian neuroscientist, or the other way around, I can't remember. But someone's French, someone's Italian, someone's neuroscientist, someone's psychoanalyst. It was published in French. It's been translated into English, and it's trying to get at exactly this. So those two guys have figured something out to try and figure out what could be the theory of subjectivity that a neuroscience would develop. But I don't think you're going to hear that in the North American context. I'm thinking in like places where psychology is very liberal minded, like places like Australia. But maybe in Uruguay, maybe in France, something will emerge out of this. Is it? Yeah. And there was something else that you asked about, something about the neuroscientific theory of the subject. I don't know. What do people think? Is there a theory of the subject in the neurosciences?
No, because they continually refer to the problem of consciousness. I mean,
Yeah.
Holographic, they would, you oftentimes hear that it's holographic, but I'm not sure
what does that
that's
mean?
metaphorical. Well, I'm not, yeah, it sounds more like a metaphor to me.
Well, we're not against metaphors. So it means, it means like that every part has got the whole contained in it.
That's the extent to which I understand the metaphor.
Right. Yeah. A hologram. Yeah. So that there's something, any part of mind has got all the rest of mind attached to it.
Like the self is projected. The self is projected. It's sort of like a functional fiction. It's an emergent property of the body. Wouldn't that be sort of what they would say?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so I was actually thinking about how, for example, the kind of changing perception of human body as, in the time of Freud, when they're doing neuroscience, to today's neuroscience, and if there's any changing understanding of where the body lies or where the psyche lies, that could influence the current incongruity between the two fields. And then this is also, maybe also happening in the cultural notions of what a desirable psyche is, and how, for example, currently in the US, the CBT, the therapy that is called cognitive, what is that? Cognitive, something like that. Like behaviors it's already having a kind of different understanding of what a psyche is. And it's so dominant, I think, in just not academic culture, but also the clinical culture, of the world, in a sense. So I was wondering how this dominant ideology or imaginations about the body and psyche are, present in this. Yeah.
That's a really good question. We're at time, right? Yeah, yeah. So my quick answer to that would be, my quick and dirty answer that I'm probably not going to stick with,
would be that actually very little has changed since 1880. That there's still an idea of that subjectivity starts here and works up. And there's certainly a lot of really interesting stuff in the psychoanalysis in the early 20th century about how the body, obviously hysteria, and how the body can be incorporated into my neurosis. But it's still a little bit here down. And I think contemporary neuroscience is very here down. The dream is brainstem activity, and sure, something to do with your mother, but really brainstem activity. So I think that the body is still a little bit passive in the neurosciences, but it's been a minute since I've actually gone in and looked at that literature. So I'd be happy to be contradicted on that. Can I just say here at the end, thank you so much for bringing us all together.
I get great things about. Thank you all for filling that space. It was really gratifying to see such a great array.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. And thanks for facilitating the distance. I really appreciate that.
Not a problem at all, Eric.
Such neat papers.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming.